Is sponsored by Wheeler Health's Better Choice program. More at wheelerhealth.org.
Helping you lead a healthier life. This is CURES.
Welcome to the CURES Show, where we explore the cutting edge of wellness for our mind, body, and spirit from credible sources. I'm Kara Sundlin. So were you following that brief moment of darkness when TikTok went away? It certainly caused a frenzy for some social media lovers over the weekend. It wasn't just teens. Dr. Laura Saunders is a psychologist at the Institute of Living. No shame if you were one of them. I saw people in the newsroom freaked out about it, and you even have folks who work at Hartford Healthcare who were worried about it. But, what does it mean, Dr. Saunders? Are we addicted if you get worried about TikTok going away, and is that a bad thing?
I think that there is a bit of an issue. I don't know if I'd call it a full-blown problem, but a bit of an issue when people are in panic about the loss of a particular social media app or social media platform. And I think what's so appealing about TikTok is that it's that short form video. So it's those, 10, I don't even know how many seconds they are. They're
Sure.
It's certainly under a minute.
Yeah.
But the short form video that gives you something funny or a scrap of information, what I worry about for teens and adults is that, if it's something silly, it's something silly. But sometimes people use social media and TikTok as a source of allegedly credible information. And I teased I'll tease my sister as don't start a sentence with, I saw on TikTok, and then expect it to be something that's believed, because, I don't say you read it somewhere, because instantly when you say, I saw it on TikTok, I think, who knows, what this information is.
No.
It has no credible source.
It's one of the reasons we do this show. I talk about cutting edge wellness from credible sources. And I have to say, I'm not that active on TikTok. I try to be there on the other social media channels, but it would probably be good if we were doing shows like this on TikTok from people who've spent their life learning credible information, which is what we're really trying to do here. But what is the problem for our mental health if we're using social media too much?
It's not real life, right? And it tends to be, I don't mind a distraction. We all need a distraction from sometimes the stressors of life. So a distraction is fine, a short-term distraction. People get lost in a movie or, binging a show. Even that I get a little worried about it, binging a couple episodes. But, unless you're sick, to spend an entire weekend, binging in a series of something means that you're not immersed in real life. You're not conversing with people. You're not maybe taking care of yourself. You're not doing the things that you need to do. And for those that really get immersed in social media, I think you lose a little touch with what's real and what's not real. Life is not about, making funny videos or on the flip side, videoing every single thing that we do and then thinking of how you can turn it into something that can be put out on social media.
Yeah, I'll ask this from my teens because they'll say, but Mom, some of it is really good. Like, I learned how to make a steak because I watched TikTok. Like, they'd rather learn how to do a steak from there than me saying, hey, I have these, 5-star chefs on my show, and this is what they say. They'd rather have TikTok show them how to make a steak and put it on a cutting board and do the carnivore diet or whatever. So is there some good about watching social media, and is it any different than watching TV?
So actually, that's an excellent example, because that example is, yes, you are such a wealth and source of information, but to watch a chef do it, that's, that process might be, I don't know, 20 minutes, a half hour, and that would be, cutting down the process, as opposed to watching a video that is, cuts it down into 15 seconds. It doesn't take 15 seconds to learn a skill. So you're missing so much. And that's what I think that, especially young people, I think us adults, we have a little bit more life perspective, but especially young people lose that kind of sense of reality. Like, oh, it's so easy to make a steak, but no, in fact, it takes all these steps and this kind of preparation. So I think what so many young people are losing is that sense of perspective on how things really work or how things, really unfold.
Yeah, and you're really most concerned. The science shows, I guess all of us should be concerned about young people, especially under the age of 13, using social media. And sadly, I mean, I'll be the mom to admit that back when my kids were getting on social media, they definitely had access to it as much as I tried to keep them off, but they were looking at it before age 13.
Yeah. Look, and that's not coming from a place of judgment. I understand it is so hard and so pervasive. And that's why, a lot of, the schools and there's a movement, not before eighth grade. It has a catchy, that's not quite the whole title, but it's like not before eighth grade.
Yeah,
Not
wait
getting
till
these
eighth.
kids
Wait till
smartphones
eighth.
before, not getting these kids smartphones before eighth grade, because even if you put all sorts of blocks and limits, these young people are bright and smart, and they do all sorts of workarounds. And so when you don't have instant access to media, then it makes it a little bit easier to prevent some of the deeper, darker things that can happen on social media.
What's happening though to the brain? This is where I wonder, how is it changing our brains, whether it be young people or adults, when you're watching too much social media?
So I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm sure there's some really good neuroscience studies that are happening out there, but think about it in terms of just attention and concentration. So if you want to do something, or you want to learn a skill, you want to study in school, it takes attention and concentration. It takes effort. And I think what a lot of these social media apps, and right now we're talking a lot about TikTok, is it makes it seem like everything is so easy, when that's not in fact the case, right? We've talked about grit and perseverance. We have an entire generation of young people that are lacking grit and perseverance, the ability to tolerate obstacles and hindrances and work it through to get into an end goal. So, and that's, I think, because so much seems to be so easy when it's in a 10-second video or 15-second video. Boy, it's just easy to learn this skill, or cook a steak, or knit a scarf. It just takes 10 seconds, when in fact it takes perseverance. And I think what we do is we shortchange our young people. Adults really love these social media apps also, but they have a little bit more long-term perspective and life experience to fall back on, and hopefully have built a little bit of grit and perseverance.
So you always talk about, rather than complete abstinence, harm reduction sometimes in some of these instances of things that can hurt our mental health. So for social media, we hear a lot about digital detox. Is that a good psychological strategy, or what does that look like?
If you can do it, that's fantastic. I think it's more realistic, and you'll have more success if you look to reduce as opposed to completely eliminate. Because then if you completely eliminate something and then you sneak back to it, you feel like you failed. When, and sometimes then once that embedded feeling of failure kind of kicks in, you're like, oh, well, I failed anyway. I might as well just go right back to the way that I was doing it. So as opposed to looking at taking breaks or cutting back. So, smartphones these days have ways to look up, how long you're spending on different apps, how long you're spending looking at screens, and to realize, like, when someone realizes, like, oh my, I spent 8, 10, 12 hours a day on screens, it's like, goodness, that means that you are not interacting with people, dealing with real life, getting your work or your school work done, paying attention to your children, whatever, spending time with your spouse or partner, whatever your real life responsibilities are. So finding ways to cut back. So if you find, you look at these things and you're like, wow, I'm spending 8 hours a day on something. Let's cut it back to 6, right? Let's start with something that's a little bit more measurable, right? We've talked about goals being, specific and measurable. Having things that are specific and measurable and help you feel a sense of success. Because then that's, if you were spending 8 and now you're spending 6, it's 2 hours more of your life you got back.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes you look at your phone and it tells you what you've been doing. You're like, there's no way I've been doing that on the phone so much. But in fact, they are such a part of our culture. How do you know if you're addicted to social media?
You know how, when a lot of people have notifications turned on their phone. So if they get, someone they follow on TikTok or Facebook or, post something, they get a ding or a beep or a buzz. So that ding or beep or buzz or whatever it is, literally lights up in your brainstem. It's kind of like, what's that? And then that urge, it's like, oh, I've got to look, I've got to see, like that urge when you can't resist those urges, right? That's something to really think twice about. And I don't want to get into the whole, addiction, because we use the word addiction, but I don't know if it's quite the same. For some people, it might be, because there are actually young people that are truly addicted to, especially some of those multiplayer video games that are like where you're playing with people all around the world and you're playing for hours and hours at a time. There's in fact internet use and video game addiction. That's kind of separate here. What I'm talking about is for the more typical person, the fact that they cannot resist those urges. They can't take breaks. They can't just have dinner with their family when all forms of phones or other things are away, and you hear that ding or that beep or that buzz, that you're like, I've got to see, I've got to, like, what if someone needs me? What if someone's posting something and I'm going to miss it, right? So realizing when you cannot resist those urges, there's a problem.
Yeah. So the other thing is, we need to recognize that we're human, and the smartest humans in the world design these devices. Mm-hmm. And I know you said, John, not a neuroscience, but the basic neuroscience teaches us that these activate the same centers in our brain that drugs or gambling do. We get like a dopamine surge from looking at this.
Absolutely. Right. And right. Some of these people that are far brighter than you and I, that are these engineers that are designing these algorithms, they know that if you are on something for X number of seconds, it's hooked your attention, and then they're going to send you something else, and then there's going to be an ad embedded in that, right? And so there's science behind a lot of this.
Yeah.
Science and mathematics behind these algorithms that hook you in and then make it so that, oh my God, 2 hours have gone by and I've done nothing, right? And again, I'm worried about my young people, but I'm also worried about us as adults, right? It happens to all of us. I try not to, but it happens to all of us, where you're just, I've heard the term doom scrolling, where you're just kind of going through, you've lost track of time, you're just looking at one thing after another, and then boom, an hour's gone by or 2 hours have gone by. And that's, again, 2 hours of your life that you're not going to get back, and that you could have maybe done something. Doesn't always have to be productive time, but maybe you could have gone for a walk. Maybe you could have done some deep breathing. Maybe you could have done something that would really and truly help you feel better.
Well, let's talk about that. When we need mental rest, because we're under a lot of stress, which most of us are, including our teens, my kids will often say, oh, I just need a break. And to them, that means looking at their phone. That is not mental rest in a way that it restores our brain. Am I correct?
That is correct. So there's a difference between a distraction, right? It is a distraction. It's a way, if you're worried about school, or you're worried about your relationship, you're worried about your kids, whatever you're worried about, and you're scrolling through something, it's a distraction. I'm not saying it's not a distraction. It is, in fact, a distraction. However, it doesn't necessarily help lower your cortisol levels, which is the stress hormone. Help you come up with other strategies to deal with A or B or C problem. And again, you don't have to be focused on solving your problems all the time. I'm okay with some distractions. It's when those distractions take over your life and make it so that you don't don't have the time and energy needed to deal with your work issues or your relationship issues or your family issues or your kids' issues, or your own issues for that matter. I don't want people to neglect themselves either. So it's what's a distraction? I just needed a half hour to just not think, versus, oh my God, it's been 2.5 hours and I don't even know where the time is.
Well, I mean, there's a lot. So I'll say that on these social media apps, I often follow people like you who are experts in mental health or experts in cutting edge wellness. So I've learned a lot of information, I think, from credible sources, because I usually try to follow people that are credible. But that's one of the things that you would encourage us to do, I guess, is harm reduction. Who are you following? Where are you getting your information? Is it something that's enriching your life, or is it something that's taking away from your mental well-being?
Right. I had a young adult tell me not that long ago that, they got some information about this particular person had said that they got some information on birth control, and birth control is this and this and this problem. I'm like, what are the sources of that information, right? Are they credible sources? Because I hear you have information and I think you've got some confounding beliefs on this topic, but what are the sources of your information? Because in the old days, we had to look it up in an encyclopedia, or we had to go to a source of reference that was a reliable and credible and peer-reviewed reference. And now I worry that a lot of young people get information that is just things that are spurious connections or correlations. And then they believe these things. I mean, this was rampant during COVID, rampant about all sorts of pieces of information that were not necessarily credible.
So social media is not going away. That much we know. Do you think it's contributing? I think I know the answer to this, but how much is it contributing to the mental health crisis you're seeing in our young people?
Unfortunately, I think it's contributing a fair amount, right? I mean, it's that kind of lack of reality. It's also it's a mindset, right? That problems should be solved in 30 seconds, or a 20-second video. It should be solved by doing X or Y. There are really no short-term instantaneous solutions to any of life's issues. And I don't want to say life is hard, but it's the way young people build grit and perseverance is by real life experiences. It's trying something, realizing it didn't go well, trying something again. It's you build that grit and perseverance by real life experiences. And when young people are embedded in their phones, it's worrisome. When I deal with a lot of teens and young adults, and when I frequently say, what do you do with your time, right? If someone's not working or not going to school, I'm like, how do you fill your day? And like, I cringe if they say video games, because that means you're not stepping into your developmental milestones. You're not getting your license. You're not getting a job. And I don't care if it's a part-time job, right? So I think we have some serious generational issues where I worry that people are lacking motivation and effort. And there's multiple, it's not just because of one thing. There's multiple sources to this.
Yeah.
But I do think social media is a significant source.
Speaking of addiction, we're going to take a quick break and hear from one of our sponsors. We'll be right back to talk more.
Struggling with gambling? Wheeler Health's Better Choice program offers personalized support and treatment to help you regain control. Visit WheelerHealth.org to learn more and take the first step towards recovery today.
Well, if you do think you might be addicted to social media, I guess the first step would be having some awareness with that. Dr. Laura Saunders is a psychologist at the Institute of Living. Do you see people in your office with social media addictions? How does that manifest? How do you help them?
It's more than just, that's not my area of specialty.
Okay.
There are internet use and kind of video game addictions. What I see more and more is young people, and we've talked about this as well, who kind of label themselves as socially anxious, like they have a social anxiety disorder. And that becomes then an excuse. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It exists. However, if you have a social anxiety disorder, it is not a reason to not leave your house and not interact with people and kind of remove yourself from the day-to-day expectations of life. So that's what I worry about. I see lots and lots of socially anxious individuals who then don't have the skills that they need to address that or overcome that or push through that. And they just sort of use it as an excuse to say, well, I don't, I'm not going to get my license, and I'm not going to get a job, and I'm not going to go to school. I'm not going to do any of the things that will actually build grit, perseverance, and help you address the things that you need to do to become a better functioning individual.
Yeah, I mean, we're hearing that it didn't happen in my house, they're counting the days, but a lot of people don't really feel a need to get their license or their driver's license. And you actually see that as a milestone, like that's a sign of something that might be a little off?
Yeah, I mean, there's developmental milestones in the course of, there's, infants and toddlers and elementary school kids and prepubescent kids, and then teenagers. They have developmental milestones, and getting your license, planning for what you're going to do post high school. And not everyone needs to go to college, but you need to have a plan, right? You need to, we still need plumbers and electricians and HVAC and mechanics. We need all those people. Those are equally as valuable jobs and skills to have. But there's lots and lots of people that just sort of don't meet those developmental milestones, and therefore don't have plans. Now, so I look at what's underneath that. Why aren't you getting your license? What are you afraid of? Why aren't you planning? If you're 16, 17, 18 years old, why aren't you planning for what you're going to do post high school? And again, not everyone needs to go to college, but there needs to be a plan in place to do something to find a purpose or function in life.
Well, we've talked about this some before, but it bears repeating that the number one thing correlated with success in adulthood, which is what we all want for ourselves and for our kids, is grit. Not what our parents made, not where we live. And the grit, you say, comes from allowing our kids to fail, and also probably to a certain extent, allowing them to be bored, which they often don't ever seem to be bored anymore.
Yeah, I mean, it's as hard as it is. Look, I have kids, I mean, mine are young adults now, but I know it's hard, right? I know it's hard when you see that they're struggling with something and that you really want to fix it. I fix other people's problems for a living, right? And so it's really hard to not just step in and fix things. I know that it's hard. However, allowing them some amount of struggle, allowing them that to build that perseverance. I mean, failure's, one of the greatest ways that people learn. I actually saw a video by Tom Brady who talked about, actually he was talking about, I love sports. He was talking about, how all these young college kids, these great athletes, just jump from school to school to school, because the moment they hear something that they don't like, they just bounce to another school. And now with these NIL deals, they're getting paid. And so they're never learning what it's like to have to sit on the bench and then re-earn your position or do the hard work that it takes to truly be successful. They want instantaneous success. So yes, it is that, those failure experiences and those hardships and those barriers and that's what builds kind of your strength and your courage.
So in our final 5 minutes together, if you're a parent and you've listened this far and you think, well, what do I do about it? I know you always encourage us to, take a step back, maybe let our kids have some failures that, other than safety, but let them work things out. But back to the social media thing, if you're thinking, gosh, I know my kids have a problem. And of course, if you're a parent like I am, they don't really want to hear it from you, especially if they're a teenager. So how do we script this? How does this go? How do we regain some control because we know it's good for them?
Right. And granted, it is hard because as adults, we say to our young people, this is in your best interest. And they're like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're of another generation. Right. I hear that all the time, too. So it's recognizing, and that's why I think sometimes the all or nothing approach doesn't work so well, but let's dial it back. Teenagers in particular, I mean, one of their deficits is that they lack perspective. They lack life experience. Of course, when you're 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, you only know, what's gone on in your life in those few years. We as adults have a whole history to look back on and say, wow, this thing happened and I learned so much from this. But to just take a step back or take an extra breath or allow them a little bit more of that uncomfortability to manage things and do things. And that's what builds you towards grit and perseverance. But I recognize that it's hard. So dial things back, 1 hour less, 2 hours less of immersion, social media immersion or video gaming immersion, and a little more time of real life experience goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, we can turn on the parental controls. I mean, it's not that hard. Google how to do it. It's on the iPhone. They figure out how to go around it. But in one sense, I think it's that balance of I got to teach them grit, let them fail on their own, or they don't have the ability right now to remove themselves as much as they should. So I have to be the heavy one. Do you think we have to be the heavy one? And how do we do that? By really taking away the phones, or how do we help them really reduce if they're a little older? Obviously, if you're younger, you've got more control.
Right. And that's why, building in some of these kind of habits or guidelines early on works better. It's much harder when they're 17 or 18 years old.
Yeah.
But it's building in some of those guidelines early on around, phones go away. I mean, especially for kids in high school, middle school and high school, phones should actually not even be in the rooms at night. They should be in a separate place. We used to have a charging table in our house where all the phones kind of went there. So doing these things to create that emotional space and that distance will help your young person not get so keyed in or addicted.
Yeah, and 90 seconds left, so we will have, in our action step, TikTok's not going away. I know it was briefly dark, but we're going to see this kind of thing. But it's really educating ourselves that these are addictive mediums. We are products, and so are our kids being sold. So we have to kind of wake up and, like any other addictive material, set some strict guidelines, or some strong guidelines, I should say, or this is not a joke. It really is affecting our mental health.
Yeah, it starts with awareness for ourselves as parents and caregivers. What's identifying the issue, being aware, talking to other parents. I think that's often really helpful. Finding out what strategies other parents use. That's connection for parents as well. And then taking some of those really hard steps.
Well, I wish all the parents out there luck. It's not easy, but we'll work on some harm reduction. Be nice if they just took away all the social media apps. I know in some countries they're doing that till age 16, but here we're going to have to figure out how to manage it. And the more information we get, the more we know we need to. Dr. Laura Saunders, child psychologist at the Institute of Living, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Kara.
Thank you for supporting the CURES show and podcast. Please share this on your social media. Like and subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already. I'd love if you leave us a review. Have a great day, everyone, and be well.